The new album is called Black Tie, White Noise. Now, it's certainly a metaphorical title, and that black and white can stand for a whole lot of things. But can we go all the way back to the very first Black Tie for David Bowie as a kid growing up in the 50s in England? Was there a black tie musically for you?
There was a literal one. That I was made to wear a black tie in a band that I was in called the Conrads. We had brown corduroy suits and black ties. And I got them to change it to a brown tie. It was a band that I left because they wouldn't do a cover version of Marvin Gaye's "Can I Get Me a Witness?" And that was the group breaker. That particular song, I remember very clearly.
Were you playing saxophone in that band?
Yeah, I was playing at the same standard that I'm playing now. But it was something that I really wanted to be at the time. All I knew is that I wanted to be in a band that had a sax lineup like Little Richard's. But I nearly got into a situation like that. There was a band called Manish Boys that I joined for about a month. All these bands you go through very quickly.
Taking its name from Muddy Waters.
Yeah, Muddy Waters song, yeah.
Well, there was Manish Boys, and there was another band, the King Bees.
The King Bees,
right?
which also was an old rhythm and blues title.
When you started playing saxophone, did you start as a young kid just doing traditional lessons, or did you specifically start because you wanted to play that kind of music?
There was a man who lived near me in where I was living at the time in Bromley. I was about 9 years old when I goaded my father into buying a saxophone, which he very kindly did. And then I took a job as a butcher's boy to pay him back, deliver meat on Saturdays. That's euphemistic, isn't it? And I found out that one of our greatest saxophonists, Ronnie Ross, baritone player, well, he lived not far from me, about 2 or 3 miles down the road. So I phoned him up and asked him if he would give classes. And he said, "I never give classes to anybody. Hey, kid, I'm having a tough enough job, making my own living here." And he said, "Okay, come along." And so I went successively 6 Saturday mornings and took lessons with him. At the end of the 6, I said, "I know enough now. I'm going to play rock and roll." And he said, "Yeah, you know enough to play rock and roll."
Transformer, Lou Reed's Transformer, there are musician credits, and in fact, Ronnie Ross, the very same man who Bowie said was his teacher, is listed as the baritone sax solo on this album.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When he said he started at 9 years old, I got all excited, and I said, I started clarinet when I was 8, and we began riffing on our various escapades as little kids with jazz and Downbeat magazine and all that. That's all coming back to me now.
Right, this is good. Now you can fill in your part of the interview now that you're hearing it.
But that's Bowie talking about some of the bands he was in early on. I guess when he was still David Jones, which was his real name.
Yeah.
And then we start talking about a horn player who played on this new album. So here's the next spoken word piece.
One of your bandmates from Tin Machine refers to you as the Neil Young of the saxophone, I believe.
I thought that, he's very arty. Lester Bowie got it much more on the nose and said I was the Bill Clinton of rock and roll.
Let's talk about Lester Bowie.
Let's talk about Bill Clinton. Let's talk about Lester.
Let's talk about Lester from the Art Ensemble of Chicago, one of the great innovative jazz musicians of this part of the century.
He's tremendous, and also has a very talented brother, as you probably know, Joe Bowie.
Yeah.
I actually met Joe Bowie before I met Lester. I met Joe in London in about 1984, and it was Joe that was actually responsible for turning me on to Lester's work. And he'd always been at the back of my mind that I would love to work with him on something or other, and the occasion was never right until this new album. And Niall and I were wondering what kind of instrument to have as a counterpoint to the vocals. And we got quite a few saxophone things down, with me playing alto and tenor. But we wanted something else to give it more variety, and that's when I knew that it would be the right time to work with Lester. So I gave him a call. He came in to do one song and was just so spectacular, so talented, and carefree and spontaneous that we just kept working with him.
He lends such a clean sound to these tracks that are sometimes so frequently dense and layered and textured.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden Lester will come on, like on that very first appearance that he makes on You've Been Around, where you conjure up that old lyrical ghost of changes, and then all of a sudden he's there like crystal.
Yeah, pristine. There's something almost, something glass-like about his playing, and all his playing is totally unpremeditated. He doesn't listen to tracks. He says, just tell me what key it's in, and then he goes in, you spin the track, and he just plays at it. He almost doesn't play with it. He plays at it.
Tell how you got involved with Nile again this time around. It's been 10 years now since Let's Dance.
I guess we've seen each other sporadically over the years, but not in a working capacity. And towards the end of the Tin Machine last tour, we did a bunch of gigs in New York, about 4 or 5 gigs in New York. And Nile came to the last 2. And afterwards we would just go out and have a meal and talk about music and how life has been going and all that stuff.
Just social stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of social stuff. And then we really got into this thing about dance music and how there was kind of a one dimension appearing in it. It was starting to become too chant-like. And there wasn't much of an opening for kind of a European melodic sensibility over it, which is I've always considered as being one of my fortes, is working. I feel really successful when I work with a kind of a hybrid thing that brings together American traditional music forms and a European, almost like a French approach to singing, which is a very strong melodic line. And a lot of British, in fact, a lot of British musical kind of work, like Anthony Newley even, is still, was a very important part of what I used to listen to when I was a kid.
Wait a minute, hold it. Can I stop here for a second? Can I conjure up the image of David Jones on the brink of becoming David Bowie, standing in front of a mirror singing "What Kind of Fool Am I"? Is that what you're talking about?
No, it wasn't specifically the songs that he did. It was an attitude that he had in the beginning, in the 60s. He was really something very interesting. There was something about him that I liked. There was a sense of loneliness about him, a solitude that I really liked about what he was doing. Or rather, I empathized with that. I felt very much that was something that in fact was welling up in me. It was something that I could work off as a force, in fact, turn my own feelings of loneliness and isolation into a force for writing.
So this aspect of him where he was unclassifiable, that also influenced you.
Really struck a note in me. Because I didn't think that I belonged to any particular form. I didn't feel like I never felt like a rock and roller. I never will. I love rock, and I love to be involved in rock music, but it's something that I use as a palette, something as colours for the songs that I write, rather than I'm not a gung-ho, testosterone-filled, fist in the air rocker.
The 70s were such an incredibly productive period for you. When you go back...
They were. 1, maybe 2 albums a year.
Yeah, I mean, incredible.
Yeah.
You, at the end of the 70s, there was like 16, 17, 18 albums, something like that. And there were other projects as well.
Yes, extraordinary. I think so many of us worked in a very similar fashion. I think there's something about youth that you can't buy and can't replace. There's an uneasy sense that none of this is going to last, so you've got to do everything now. It's only validated by your own innocence and naivete. I mean, later on you realize that you have all the time in the world, even though that time is finite. But during that period of youthful zest, I think you feel that what you have to say is the most important thing in the world, and you've got to say it as quickly and in as many different ways as you can.
You say you have to do everything now, and certainly in your example, everything includes a whole wide-ranging list of things, much of it being abuse of yourself, substance abuse.
Again, it was the tail end of the 60s into the 70s, and we found ourselves, all of us, I think probably my situation has been more strongly elaborated and magnified upon than most others. But there were, believe me, a bunch of us at that period going through a real hedonistic slide into some kind of abyss, and some of us were fortunate enough to be able to get out of it.
How did you manage to create that amazing body of work in that decade when you were living this hedonistic life and taking the substances that you were taking and abusing yourself the way you were? You still managed to produce a body of work then that stands.
A lot of it, I think, a lot of it became an alternative to reality. A lot of it became an alternative to life itself, that one's work became the fabric of existence. And one tended to anesthetize oneself and become numb to a real-life situation. And all energies were defined in an artistic... All feelings were defined in an artistic manner. And so you made those artistic definitions work rather than having to face up to emotional and probably spiritual responsibilities. But I think also on my part, personally, always... there was a spiritual search going on. I think from the beginning, ever since I was a child, I knew that I wanted to define my relationship with the universe, not in a trippy kind of, 60s fashion. I always felt a sense of God, and I never quite was sure how to express myself within that warmth, within that sort of spiritual reality. I think I believe a lot of writers, even unconsciously, are trying to make a connection that way. Well, I've fortunately never been able to define God, and I think that's probably as it should be. I think for me, it's been almost a flagrant abuse of our limited intellectual capacities to try and define God. I think it's far better that we arrive at a situation where we realize it's not important, and it's also absolutely impossible to be able to define God. And when we get to that state, I think we can achieve a better understanding of exactly what place God is in our lives and what place he has in our lives and what place we have in his life.
What was your religious upbringing?
Straightforward Protestant, Church of England.
I was in
the church choir.
Really?
Yeah. I was in the church choir briefly for a couple of weeks with the guy who knocked my eye out.
In the choir? While you were rehearsing or something?
No, actually, it was at school. We also attended the same school. His name is George Underwood. There's a wonderful painter and illustrator. And we had a fight over his girlfriend, who I was dating, behind his back. I've never done that again.
No, you don't want to risk
He also,
your eye.
I must add that he's also still my best friend after all these years, yeah.
I mean, did anybody come to you during that period when you were being rather self-destructive and just grab you and shake you and say, David, cut this out?
Well,
Straighten up here.
Yeah, which of course does nobody any good, because one reacts against that.
Of course, it gets even
completely
more
stubbornly.
Sure.
I mean, the one thing that I've learned, I think maybe is the most useful thing that I've learned, is that you cannot ever control anybody else's life. And it's even really hard to suggest to somebody what they should be doing, that really they have to find out for themselves. And if they're going to, they will. And if they won't, they won't. And it did so happen that it coincided that my very close friend, over 20 years, Coco Schwab, who's been my friend and my assistant since the very early 70s, was the one who was indeed sort of trying to hold up a mirror to what I was doing and saying, a mirror with nothing on it, I might add, that maybe that I should really take a good look at what I was doing to myself. And with her support and my own realization that I was killing myself, I kind of eventually scrambled free from that situation.
Do you have that commitment now to your music?
To music?
Yeah.
I do, because it's something that I profit by. Also,
wait, define that. What do you mean by profit by?
Profit by in terms of that it's provided me with a wonderfully financially rewarding career. Also, I find that I still can express myself as an artist through my music. I think at this age, 46 now, coming up 47, surely, had I not had success at this age, I don't know. Again, it's too hypothetical. I don't know. I don't know if I would have had the perseverance.
I wonder if you're, in fact, a workaholic. I mean, if that's the
without doubt,
the personality trait.
Yes,
there.
without doubt. I mean, that's been a real major change with me in having a new relationship, having a wife and potentially a new family. Is that I really have had to measure what percentage of my life is taken up with my work, and that I have to pull it out of myself to start learning how to really give and relate to the people around me. All that comes, I think, later in life, unfortunately.
On the new album, on Black Tie, White Noise, the title track refers to not only an examination of racial relationships, but very specifically was inspired by your experiencing the LA riots last year. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, as best that I can. Iman and I had a holiday in Italy, and we flew back very excitedly to LA. On the day that the riots started, it hadn't even occurred. We'd been in Europe for such a long time that it hadn't occurred to us that the verdict was due on the Rodney King case. And we came back that afternoon, and the driver, in fact, of the car that took us back into town from the airport said, "Can you believe that verdict?" And, "What are you talking about?" I said, "The Rodney King, they got acquitted." And, "Oh, hell." And we both looked at each other and sort of just knew what was going to happen. I mean, it was just inevitable. And I think that was the overwhelming feeling of that week, was the inevitability of it, and also the numbness that it left both of us in. Really focused and tautly emotional time for us, in as much that we were a mixed couple, and it was it brought up everything about not about our relationship, but everything that surrounded our relationship, and it was a really testing time in that way. What we're seeing at the moment is a movement in the black community for a form of separatism. There's a new need for a strong black economy, because the hand of liberal acceptance is given out and it's pulled back. It's given out and pulled back ever since the days of the marches in the 60s. I think that the whole dream, the whole ideal started to fragment and fall apart when it was realized that what the movement, in fact, was about was to commit all things black to all things white. And with that understanding, I think a whole new realization of what integration had to be about started back then. And by the 70s, it was really had started to become muddied and muddled. Now the corrective attitude has to be a movement from all things wrong to all things right.
One final question for David Bowie. All throughout your public career, you have created characters, whether it be Ziggy, whether it be Aladdin Sane, the Thin White Duke. You've created these persona. Is there any danger that the very happy, peaceful, fulfilled, married David Bowie that sits before me right now with a smile on his face and who seems to be enjoying life and embracing everything, is there any danger this is going to just be another character and you're going to wake up one day and go, "Oh man, I'm tired of that, let's go on to something else"? Well,
I take your point, but firstly I have to deconstruct the question. I think I have to qualify it with the fact that the characters were not written after 1976. To my knowledge, the music that I've put out since that period has been, however idiosyncratic, has been fundamentally myself as a writer. The suits have changed, but the music has remained the same. I think probably there's one more character that I'd like to write for theatre, for musical theatre, maybe a little later, and it does appeal to me, and I would like to do one more. And he'll come.
Yeah, but do you know what I mean about being happy? Do you? I don't want to be facetious.
No, I understand.
Do you fear that you'll wake up one day and fall back into that old problem?
No, firstly because I know how those characters evolved, and they evolved through sort of a blind understanding of one's reality. I think my reality quota has changed a lot over the last at least 10 years. I don't suspect that I would slip back into the emotional numbing of the 70s ever again.
Well, for a man who can sing on the lyric version of the wedding song, Don't I Feel Like a Saint Alive, I Believe in Magic. I mean, that's a happy man.
Yes, a bit of Loving Spoonful in there.
David Bowie, thanks for being our guest.
My pleasure.
One-on-one.
Thank you very much, man.
Take care.